out of the wheat fields into the places of storage comes the wheat. Wheat is a food, one of the biggest crops of all. Here we see a loaf made from wheat, whole grain wheat, but the method of making this was not sound. You see, it looks very heavy, and so it was. It is very important to use good methods in making your whole grain bread. You see, the texture was coarse. Within a few days, this loaf went mouldy, as you first saw. Now you'll see quite a different loaf, one made with good methods. This one is the same that you've just seen. But now here you see a really good loaf made by correct methods. Now we shall endeavor to show you correct methods of making a loaf from whole grain. Here is a stone grinder, a small stone grinder, one that is large enough for a small commercial use and also not too large for home use. You notice it has two stones, one revolves, the other stays still. This grinder can be procured from Nature's Health Center. The product of this little grinder is fine stone ground flour from any type of grain. Here we see whole wheat having been ground into fine flour, uncontaminated by bleaches or any such thing. And now preparation is being made to make a loaf of 100% stone ground flour into an edible loaf of bread. Weighing the flour is the first thing. Then take the yeast from the refrigerator. Now yeast is a plant and it will grow under favorable conditions. It needs to be kept in your refrigerator so that it will keep while not in use, and then when it has the favorable conditions, it will grow and thus give rising to your article of food that you're making out of grains, whatever that might be. And now to the yeast was added 1 cup of flour, and then some honey is also added, this being a yeast food. Now honey, of course, is a very good food, containing up to 10 vitamins and quite a few minerals. It is a very good yeast food. Malt can be used also instead of honey, or raw sugar, but honey we prefer. Now, having added the flour and the honey to the yeast, and now take a cup of water, and this water needs to be at the right temperature. 90 degrees Fahrenheit is the correct temperature. If the water is too hot, it will destroy the yeast. If it is too cold, it will not work or grow. Yeast rises dough by the action of growth and the gases that are expelled from the growing plant rise the dough and aerate it. This is the action of yeast upon dough. And now these things are creamed together so that they can be smooth. The yeast needs to be smoothed out. Now take a saucepan with a little hot water in the bottom, place the basin over it that has the sponge in, the sponge mixture, across over the top, and let it stand for a little that it might start to work. The yeast starts to grow. And then prepare your flour by adding a little gluten to it and stir it up while you're waiting for the sponge to work. Now gluten is a protein substance found in wheat. This protein substance is that which gives the spring to a loaf of bread and adds structure to your loaf. Now for a little shortening that will make the loaf very nice and help in keeping qualities, we choose olive oil. You can use other oils, but olive oil we find is the best of all. And now, having measured out your oil into a cup, you can add a little water into your blender. Then pour the oil into the blender also. Of course, you can add these things directly into your sponge, but emulsification of oils help them to digest, and also they are more easily combined one with another if they are emulsified. Now this that you just saw being put in is lecithin, an extract from soybeans. Lecithin is a very good food, a nerve food. It is high protein and also a very oily substance, and it helps in the rising of dough and feeds the yeast. Now the water is added slowly to this oil and lecithin mixture in the blender while it is going until it becomes quite a creamy substance, emulsified oil. Now, to add the water, to add the salt to your water, just tip it in and stir it up. It is better to add the salt to the water than it is to the flour mixture. You'll get a far better even distribution of the salt through the whole mixture, no lumps. Now you see the sponge has worked to the desired thing, and it is time to add the emulsified oil to the sponge mixture. If you have a Dura health unit and you're using your blender as is seen here, all you have to do is screw the bottom part off and the mixture will drop straight through, and you can clean it out easily into your mixture. And now, having added that, the next thing is to add the water to your sponge. Now the water being added to the sponge and stirred up is now ready to add to the flour. Now the flour needs to have a little hole made in the bottom so that you can easily mix it all together. Then pour the sponge mixture into the flour and start mixing it together. Now, the dough is starting to be made. First of all, use a fork to mix the sponge and the flour together, and then you can clean the fork off and get your hands right into the mixture and start making the dough. Now here we see a change of operators, and from here we really make the dough. You notice the mass is becoming more workable. It is not too sloppy. You don't want a sloppy mixture. You want a firm dough mass, and if you need a little bit more water, this can be added by dipping the hands into a basin with some warm water in it and kneading it up by a pulling method, as you see here. Pushing away and pulling to, folding it over, pressing the air into it and out of it. Don't forget a little flour on the board, stops it from sticking, not too much, just a little. You see it's starting to become elastic now. See how spongy the dough becomes. This is the way it must be. You don't want it too wet and you don't want it too dry. Now here we show this to you again as another dough is done. Now notice as you want more water, just dip your hands into the container with some warm water, and this is the best method of adding more moisture to your dough. If you pour it in, well, you're often likely to get too much. Just a little dampening here and there, and this helps to get the right constituency. If it's too dry, you'll get a very poor rise in your loaf, and it'll be all cracky and not a nice even loaf at all. We'll show you the results of too dry a loaf at the end of the film. Now you notice it takes just that little while to get the moisture through the lump of dough, and as you push and pull and knead with your hands, it becomes elastic. The more the gluten is worked, the tougher and spongier it becomes. And it is the gluten content of the flour that will give you the structure or the texture of your loaf. The elasticity depends on the gluten. Now you notice it's becoming very spongy here, and it really feels alive. When you push on it, it'll spring back. This is the way it must be to have a satisfactory finished article. Now the lump of dough is almost ready now to be put down to rise, and this rising process takes quite some little time. So you put it into the basin and make sure the container is large enough so that it can rise up to 6 times its size. The dough is set in a warm place to rise with a damp, warm cloth over it, not a dry one as you saw in the first place. Then cover this up with a blanket used for this purpose and put it in a warm place, maybe by the stove or some warm place that is available, and you can assist the rising by putting some hot water bags about it, not right up against the basin, but around about so that there is a warmth being distributed where it needs it. Now we see it is 6 o'clock, and you'll see just how long it takes to rise. A couple of hours, maybe. A little over half an hour has gone by, and you notice it is rising. It'll rise a lot more yet. The oven is hot. Now, we'll show you how we make some good, cheap bread tins. Cut an olive oil tin in half, and you have 2 fine tins. A little bit more time has gone, and you notice the mass is getting larger, but it needs a little longer yet, so it will be covered up and left for a little while. Remember, don't let it get a chill. Still rising. Yes, it can be covered again for a little while. You needn't open it as much as this. Well, 1 hour and 10 minutes and the dough is ready. Have your table nice and warm, and when you touch it and it starts to go down, knock it down quickly, then clean it out of your basin onto the table ready to knead up into a lump to be divided to mold it into loaves. A little pushing and pulling movement doesn't need very much, just making it into a nice mass, and then divide and mold. Now, a good cutting instrument, something like this, is better than a knife. Divide the dough into 4 even pieces. Each piece would be about 1 pound, 2 to 3 ounces in weight if it were weighed. This gives a finished loaf of 1 pound weight. Now each piece is kneaded a little, made into a little ball, and put aside in a warm place to recover after knocking down, and then you can work on it to mold it into loaves. Cover with a cloth so that you don't get it chilled. Put it in a warm place. By the stove or some place that's warm. And then the next thing is to mold it into loaves. It only takes a few minutes before you're ready to mold into loaves. Now the procedure of molding is very important. Notice this very carefully as the pieces of dough are flattened out and folded over into a loaf and put into the tin. Now, notice the first thing is to flatten out the piece of dough, then folding in the edges, then the ends, and then rolling it into a roll like a jam roll, a little flour on the bottom of the loaf, tucking the ends in and into the tin. Brush the top of the loaf with oil. This is very important because if you miss out on this, you'll find that the top of the loaf will crack and will not rise correctly. You notice how elastic and springy the dough is. It has plenty of life in it. Now this you must have to have a good loaf. Otherwise you'll get a very brittle or a very sodden loaf. Now notice the ball is put onto the table, flattened out with the hands. Then the one edge is folded in and flattened down. The idea is to get all the air out, because if there's any air left in, it will become all bubbly inside with air pockets and not a very nice textured loaf. Stretch it out a little, fold your ends in, and then take the edge that is furthermost away from you with the thumbs toward yourself and roll it over like a jam roll. Now here's another one. You notice a little round ball being flattened out. You can use your hands flat or your knuckles, whichever you find the best. Fold the edges over. Flatten out all the air. Get the air bubbles out. Now this one we'll do very slowly for you so that you can see every movement. This is most important. Flattening the little ball of dough, folding over one edge, then another edge, then stretching it out a little. Notice how elastic it becomes. Bringing the ends in, use your knuckles to press down, and then taking the edge away from yourself with your thumbs toward you and roll it over, tucking it in tightly and not breaking the skin on the top, because this is to be the top of your loaf and you want a nice top to your loaf. Then don't forget to brush the top with oil. Any vegetable oil will do for this purpose. This is soy oil being used here. It adds luster to the loaf as well as helping it in the rising process, keeping the top nice and elastic all the way through the rising process, both out of the oven and in the oven. Now one more left, and notice how quickly you can move and work when you become accustomed to doing it. Don't forget to put a little flour on the bottom of the loaf. Then brush the tops over with the oil. This one has a lid on it, a little different type of tin. Now the loaves are set in a warm place to prove or to rise. You can see the size of them. Cover them over with a dry cloth, and 2 hours has passed since we first put the dough to rise. Now, the next thing is to bake. After half an hour of proving, the tins are put into the oven to bake. And be careful as you put them in that you don't bump them so that they will fall down. Now, after 40 minutes of being in the oven, you can have a peep, and yes, they are rising nicely, colouring up well too. 1 hour's time and you have the finished article coming out of the oven. It looks very nice, and it will taste nice too. Now, to add a little more lustre to your loaf, brush the top of the loaf with hot water, just hot water only. Keep a brush for this purpose. It is a good idea. Now, here we have a couple more tins. These loaves do not need brushing with hot water, only the open loaf. And now you can see what a beautiful light loaf you can make from 100% finely ground, stone ground flour. These loaves are a delight to the eye, also to the taste, and they smell good too. They're light to handle and nutritious. And what's more, it gives quite a thrill to the housewife to be able to do this. Now you see here are 2 loaves, one that was not made correctly. It did not have enough water in this loaf. You see, it is not quite as nice as the other loaf. So it pays to follow the instructions carefully. Now, cutting the loaf of bread is just as important as making a good loaf of bread, to do this part right also. A nice loaf of bread cut into slices correctly will be very good. Now you see here a sharp knife being used, and you notice how thin the slice you can cut. Notice the texture of this loaf. It's nice and fine and even. It's not crumbly. It's elastic, alive looking, and see how thin the slice you can cut. You don't need to cut big slices if you use a sharp knife and if you make a good loaf. Now here we are cutting with a blunter knife. You see, it's a little bit more effort, and you need to cut a larger slice. But that's not too bad. Now, a knife that is not quite so sharp. It's not a good idea to use a knife like this, because it breaks the loaf to pieces, as you'll see. And it makes it pretty hard for the operator as well. Now you notice just what it does to a loaf to use a blunt knife. You see this? Now don't do this to your nice loaf of bread that you've made. Use a sharp knife. Yes, you notice. A slice now, cut off again, and you'll get a nice slice of bread. A thin slice that will not break or crack as you bend it about. See how nice and thin that is, like a wafer. The other slice is all broken with holes. That's the result of the blunt knife. Now see this slice, how you can bend it around. It'll make good sandwiches. It's nice and elastic and it's alive. It's good to taste, nutritious and beautiful. why, and all the household will be happy too. Here's little Beryl, she says, I'll have a nice slice of this beautiful bread. It's nutritious, it's health-giving, and all your family will be benefited greatly if you make your own 100% stone ground flour into wholemeal loaves. We trust that you have enjoyed watching this film, that it has been beneficial to you, and that as you go forward to make your own whole wheat loaves, that you will have success and good health. This is Nature's Health Center wishing you every success and good health to all. Thank you.